The rain hammered against Maya's skin like frozen needles, each drop a reminder that she was running out of time. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled through the dense forest, branches clawing at her jacket, tearing through the fabric like desperate fingers trying to hold her back. Behind her, the howls grew closer. They found me. The thought sent ice through her veins, colder than the storm that had been chasing her for 3 days straight. 3 days since she'd made the mistake of trusting someone. 3 days since her world had shattered into a million pieces, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret that could get her killed. Thunder cracked overhead, and Maya pressed herself against the rough bark of an ancient oak, fighting to control her breathing. Her heart pounded so hard, she was sure they'd hear it echoing through the trees. The pack hunters were good, too good, but she was better at hiding. She had to be. It was the only reason she was still alive. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in stark white flashes, and that's when she saw him. A massive wolf lay crumpled against a fallen log 20 feet away, his dark fur matted with blood that looked black in the stormlight. One of his hind legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, and his breathing was so shallow. Maya thought he might already be dead. Keep running. Her survival instinct screamed. This isn't your problem. But something about the way he lay there, broken and alone, made her chest tighten with a familiar ache. She knew what it felt like to be abandoned, left to die by people who should have protected you. The memory of her own pack's rejection burned through her like acid, as fresh and painful as the day it happened. Another howl pierced the night. Closer now. Maybe half a mile. She had minutes, maybe less, before they found her trail. Maya looked at the dying wolf again, and something inside her cracked wide open. "Damn it," she whispered, pushing away from the tree. She ran to him, her boots slipping on the wet leaves, and dropped to her knees beside his massive form. Up close, she could see the extent of his injuries, deep gashes across his ribs, that mangled leg, and something else, something that made her blood freeze. Silver. The metallic scent was unmistakable, poisonous to their kind. Someone had used silver weapons on him, which meant this wasn't just a hunting accident. This was an execution attempt. "Who did this to you?" she murmured, her hands hovering over his wounds. She'd never seen a wolf this large before. Even injured and unconscious, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. His eyes fluttered open, golden, fierce, and completely aware despite his condition. Those eyes locked onto hers, and Maya felt something electric shoot down her spine. Recognition flickered in his gaze, impossible as that seemed. She'd never seen him before. She would have remembered. Trust. The word whispered through her mind, though she couldn't tell if it was her own thought or something else entirely. The wolf's breathing hitched, a low whine escaping his throat, and Maya made her decision. She placed her hands on the worst of his wounds, closed her eyes, and let the heat building in her chest flow outward. This was dangerous. More dangerous than running from hunters. More dangerous than being caught. Using her gift always left traces, energy signatures that certain wolves could track for miles. But watching this magnificent creature die when she could save him felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in. Warmth flowed from her palms into his broken body, and she felt his injuries responding to her touch. The silver poisoning fought back, burning her hands as she drew it out of his system. But she gritted her teeth and pushed harder. Bones began to knit together, torn muscle regenerating, blood clotting and healing. The wolf's eyes widened, and she saw something like wonder flicker across his features before exhaustion dragged her under. Healing something this badly injured always took everything she had. As consciousness slipped away, Maya heard the hunters breaking through the tree line behind her, their shouts echoing through the storm. She'd saved him, but now they were both going to die. The last thing she remembered was golden eyes, watching her with an intensity that burned brighter than her gift, and a deep voice that couldn't possibly be coming from the wolf's throat. Mine. But wait, before we dive deeper into this story that's about to change everything, I need you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next? When Maya wakes up, She's going to discover that saving this wolf wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the moment her entire destiny shifted. And trust me, you don't want to miss what the most powerful Alpha King does when he claims what's his. Now, let's see what Maya has gotten herself into. Maya's consciousness returned like surfacing from deep dark water, slow, disorienting, and accompanied by the strangest sensation that everything in her world had fundamentally shifted while she slept. The first thing she noticed was warmth. Real warmth. Not the desperate heat she'd generated to heal the wolf, but the kind that seeped into your bones and made you want to sink deeper into whatever was holding you. The second thing she noticed was the scent surrounding her. Pine, cedar, and something wild and masculine that made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't want to examine. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself lying on a massive bed, covered in furs, in a room that looked like it belonged in some ancient castle. Stone walls rose around her, and a fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in. None of this made sense. The last thing she remembered was collapsing in the forest, hunters closing in, and those impossible golden eyes watching her with an intensity that had burned itself into her memory. "You're awake." The voice came from the shadows near the window, deep and commanding in a way that made every instinct in her body sit up and pay attention. Maya bolted upright, immediately regretting the sudden movement as her head spun. Using her healing gift always left her drained for days, but this felt different, deeper, like she'd poured more of herself into that wolf than she'd ever given to anyone before. A figure stepped into the firelight, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out a simple black shirt in ways that should be illegal. Dark hair fell in waves to his collar, and when he turned to face her fully, she found herself staring into those same golden eyes that had haunted her last conscious moments. But now they belonged to a man whose presence filled the room like a physical force. Beautiful didn't begin to cover it. He was stunning in the way that predators were stunning, all lethal grace and barely contained power. But it was more than that. Looking at him felt like looking at something that had been carved from her deepest, most secret dreams. "Who are you?" Maya's voice came out rougher than she intended, and she cleared her throat, trying to project strength she didn't feel. "Where am I?" His lips curved in what might have been a smile, if there had been any warmth in it. Instead, it looked like a wolf, baring its teeth. "You saved my life, little healer. Did you think I wouldn't find out who you were?" The words hit her like ice water. He knew. Somehow, this stranger knew about her gift, which meant he was dangerous in ways that went far beyond his obvious physical advantages. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya lied. Starting to push herself off the bed, she needed to run. Now. Before whatever game he was playing got deadly. He moved faster than should have been possible, crossing the room in 2 strides and placing a hand on her shoulder, not roughly, but with enough pressure to make it clear that leaving wasn't currently an option. Maya Karen, 23 years old. Exiled from the Silver Moon Pack 3 years ago, for reasons they refused to discuss publicly. His voice was conversational, but underneath it was something that made her skin prickle with awareness. "You've been living off the grid ever since, moving from territory to territory, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But you have a gift, don't you? A gift that saved my life when silver poisoning should have killed me." Each word felt like a physical blow. Nobody was supposed to know her real name. Nobody was supposed to know about Silver Moon. She'd spent 3 years covering her tracks, becoming nobody, disappearing into the spaces between pack territories, where lost wolves went to fade away. "How do you know all that?" Maya whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "Because I've been looking for you." The admission hung between them, like a loaded weapon. Maya stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deception, but found only truth and something else. Something that made her stomach flutter, despite every survival instinct screaming at her to be afraid. "Looking for me? Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, those golden eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, like he could see straight through to her soul. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Because 3 years ago, a healer with silver flame in her blood disappeared from the Silver Moon Pack. The same night, every oracle in the Northern Territories had the same vision. A woman with light in her hands and fire in her heart, standing at the center of a prophecy that could change everything. Maya's blood turned to ice. That's impossible. I'm nobody special. I'm just... You're mine. The words cut through her protest, like a blade, spoken with such absolute certainty that they seemed to reshape reality around them. Maya felt something deep in her chest respond to the claim, a recognition that terrified her more than any threat could have. I don't belong to anyone, she said, but even as the words left her lips, she could hear how hollow they sounded. His hand moved from her shoulder to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. You healed me when touching my wounds should have burned the skin from your bones. You pulled silver poisoning from my blood when that should have killed us both. Do you know what that makes you, little healer? Maya couldn't speak, couldn't think past the warmth of his touch, and the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and terrible all at once. It makes you the mate of the Alpha King. The world tilted on its axis. Alpha King. There was only one Alpha King in all the Northern Territories. Only one wolf powerful enough to claim that title and hold it against all challengers. Chaol Blackthorn. The most feared and respected leader their kind had known in centuries. Maya stared into those golden eyes and felt her carefully constructed life crumble around her like paper in flames. No, she breathed. That's not possible. But even as she said it, she could feel the truth settling into her bones like molten gold, changing everything it touched. Chaol Blackthorn smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, transforming his face from beautiful to absolutely devastating. Hello, mate, he said. We have so much to discuss. Maya pulled away from Chaol's touch like it burned, wrapping her arms around herself as memories she'd spent 3 years trying to bury came rushing back with vicious clarity. You don't understand, she whispered, backing toward the far wall. I'm not some prophesied savior. I'm the reason 16 wolves died that night. I'm the reason an entire bloodline was wiped out. Your oracles got it wrong. Chaol didn't move from where he stood, but his golden eyes tracked her every movement with predatory focus. Tell me what happened, Maya. The way he said her name, like it was something sacred he was afraid of breaking, made her chest ache. Nobody had spoken her real name with anything but disgust or fear in 3 years. Hearing it from his lips, gentle and accepting, was almost more than she could bear. Tell you? She let out a bitter laugh. You want to know why the great Alpha King's supposed mate is nothing but a walking disaster? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. The memories crashed over her like a riptide, pulling her back to that terrible night when everything she'd ever known turned to ash. She was 20, still young enough to believe that love could conquer anything, still naive enough to think that being different made her special instead of dangerous. The Silver Moon Pack had always been wary of her healing abilities, but they'd tolerated them because she was careful, controlled. She only healed minor wounds, only used enough power to help without drawing attention. Until Festus. Festus Silvermoon, the Alpha's youngest son, golden boy of the pack, and the wolf she'd been foolish enough to love with her whole heart. When he'd been brought back from a hunting expedition with his chest torn open and silver poisoning racing through his veins, Maya hadn't hesitated. She'd poured everything she had into saving him, letting her power flow unchecked for the first time in her life. That's when the silver flame appeared. My power isn't normal healing, Maya said, her voice hollow as she stared out the window at the dark forest beyond. Most healers work with life energy. Green light, warm and safe, but mine burns silver. Silver flame that can purge any poison, heal any wound, even bring someone back from the edge of death. She turned to face Chaol, expecting to see fear or disgust in his eyes. Instead, she found only intense focus, like he was memorizing every word. The problem with silver flame, she continued, is that it's not just healing energy. It's transformative. It doesn't just fix what's broken, it changes things, makes them stronger, better, more than they were before. When Festus had awakened from his healing sleep, he wasn't the same wolf who'd been carried and dying. He was faster, stronger, his senses sharper than any wolf in pack history. For 3 days, he'd seemed like a miracle. The Alpha's son, saved and enhanced by his mate's incredible gift. Then the hunger started. Silver Flame doesn't just heal, Maya whispered. Tears she'd thought were long dried up, beginning to fall. It awakens things. Ancient things. Things that should stay buried. Festus had started changing in ways that went beyond physical improvement. His wolf became aggressive, territorial beyond reason. He couldn't shift back to human form for hours at a time, and when he hunted, he didn't hunt for food. He hunted for the thrill of the kill. The night everything went wrong, Festus had been missing for 2 days. When the search parties found him, he was standing in a clearing surrounded by the bodies of 16 wolves from a neighboring pack. All of them torn apart, with surgical precision, all of them killed for sport. He'd looked at Maya with eyes that burned silver instead of their usual warm brown, and she'd known with horrible certainty that she'd created a monster. The Silver Flame doesn't just heal, Maya said, her voice breaking. It awakens bloodlines. Ancient, primal bloodlines that evolved beyond normal wolves millennia ago. Bloodlines that were buried for good reason. Kale's expression hadn't changed throughout her story, but Maya could see something shifting in his eyes. Understanding. And something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Festus became something called a dire wolf, she continued. A creature from the old legends, back when our kind were more beast than man. The pack tried to contain him, tried to reason with him, but dire wolves don't reason. They hunt, they kill, and they're nearly impossible to stop. In the end, it had taken the combined strength of both packs and 3 days of hunting to bring Festus down. Even then, he'd almost escaped. Almost killed Maya's own father before the final silver bullet found its mark. When it was over, the pack council made their decision, Maya said, wiping tears from her cheeks. They couldn't execute me. I was technically innocent, but they couldn't let me stay. Too dangerous. Too much potential for it to happen again. You're banished from this territory, and all allied lands, Alpha Silvermoon had pronounced, his voice heavy with grief and rage. If you ever attempt to use that cursed gift again, if you ever awaken another monster, we will hunt you down and end you ourselves. Maya had looked around the council chamber at wolves she'd grown up with, wolves she'd called family, and seen nothing but fear and disgust reflected back at her. The boy you loved is dead, because of you, the Alpha had continued. 16 innocent wolves are dead because of you. Remember that, Maya Karen. Remember that every time you're tempted to play healer again. Maya looked at Kale, expecting him to be backing toward the door, expecting him to call for guards to drag the dangerous exile away from his territory. Instead, he stepped closer. You think that story makes me want to reject you? He asked softly. Doesn't it? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. I'm cursed, Kale. Everything I touch turns to ash. Everyone I try to save becomes something twisted. To her complete shock, Kale smiled. Not the sharp predatory expression from before, but something warm and gentle that transformed his entire face. Maya, he said, reaching for her hands. Do you know what bloodline runs in my veins? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Direwolf, Kale said simply. I am what Festus became, but I was born this way. I've spent my entire life learning to control that nature, to channel it into protection instead of destruction. And the only way to awaken a dormant direwolf bloodline, the only way is with the touch of a silver flame healer. Maya stared at him in shock. That's impossible. You didn't create a monster that night, Kale said, his hands warm and steady around hers. You awakened something that was always there, something that needed guidance, training, understanding. Festus went mad because he had no idea what he was becoming, but I do. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You didn't curse him, little healer. You revealed his true nature, and maybe if someone had been there to help him understand what that meant, 16 wolves would still be alive. The words hit her like absolution, like forgiveness she'd never thought she deserved. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like she could breathe. 3 hours later, Maya found herself following Kale through a forest that seemed older than time itself. The trees here were massive, ancient pines and oaks that stretched so high their canopies disappeared into mist. Moss covered everything in a blanket of ethereal green, and the very air hummed with power that made her skin tingle. "Where exactly are we going?" Maya asked, trying to keep the breathlessness out of her voice. Kale moved through the forest like he was born to it, never stumbling, never hesitating, while she had to work to keep up with his long strides. "Somewhere you need to see," he replied without turning around. "Somewhere that will help you understand what you really are." Maya wanted to argue that she understood herself perfectly well. Thank you very much. She was a broken healer with a dangerous gift and blood on her hands. But something about this place made protest die in her throat. The forest felt aware, like it was watching her, weighing her, preparing to judge whether she was worthy of whatever secrets lay ahead. As they walked deeper into the ancient woods, Maya began to notice things that made no logical sense. Symbols carved into tree bark that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. Stones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at for too long, and everywhere, that strange humming energy that seemed to resonate with something deep in her chest. "Kale," she said, stopping abruptly, "what is this place?" He turned to face her, and in the dappled forest light, his eyes seemed to glow with their own inner fire. "This is the heart of the wilds, Maya, the oldest sacred site in all the northern territories. Some say it's where the first wolves learned to shift between forms. Others believe it's where the barrier between our world and the spirit realm grows thin. And you brought me here because..." Instead of answering, Kale held out his hand. "Trust me." Maya stared at his outstretched palm, remembering the last time someone had asked her to trust them. Festus had said the same words the night before she'd healed him, the night before everything went wrong. But looking into Kale's golden eyes, she felt something she'd thought was dead forever. Hope. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe she was setting herself up for another disaster. But she placed her hand in his anyway. The moment their skin touched, the forest around them shifted. The humming energy became a symphony, resonating through her bones like the world's most ancient song. The symbols carved into the trees blazed with silver light, the same color as her flame, and the very air seemed to thicken with magic, so old and powerful it made her knees weak. "Do you feel it?" Kale's voice was soft with wonder. Maya could only nod. She felt everything: the heartbeat of the forest, the whispers of spirits long past, the weight of prophecies written in starlight and sealed with blood. Power flowed through her like a river of molten silver, and for the first time in 3 years, it didn't feel wrong or dangerous. It felt like coming home. Kale led her deeper into the sacred grove, until they reached a clearing dominated by a massive stone altar. The altar was covered in symbols that Maya somehow understood without ever having seen them before. Wolf heads intertwined with flames, moons in all their phases, and at the center, a mark that made her heart stop. A silver wolf surrounded by flames, its eyes burning with inner light. "The mark of the silver flame," Kale said, following her gaze. "Legend says it will appear on the one chosen to bridge the gap between wolf and spirit, between the old ways and the new." Maya's hand moved unconsciously to her left shoulder, where a birthmark had always resided. A birthmark she'd hidden her entire life, because it looked disturbingly like. "Show me," Kale said gently. With trembling fingers, Maya pulled aside her shirt to reveal the mark on her shoulder. In the sacred light of the grove, it wasn't just a birthmark anymore. It was a brand that pulsed with silver fire, identical to the carving on the altar. "No," Maya whispered, backing away. "No, this is insane. I'm not some chosen one. I'm just a girl who made a terrible mistake." Her words were cut off as the altar suddenly blazed with light. Symbols flared to life across its surface, and the air filled with voices speaking in a language that predated human memory. But somehow, impossibly, Maya understood every word. When silver flame burns bright, and dire wolf walks in flesh, the marked one shall arise, to heal what once was rent. She who bridges wolf and spirit, she who speaks with light, shall stand between the worlds when shadows claim the night. The voices faded, leaving behind a silence so complete that Maya could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The prophecy of the silver flame, Kale said quietly, spoken by the first oracle over 2,000 years ago. Every generation, the shamans and spiritual leaders have waited for the one who would fulfill it. Maya stared at the altar, at her mark, at Kale's face filled with something that looked disturbingly like reverence. This is impossible. Prophecies aren't real. They're just stories people tell to make sense of random events. Are they? Kale stepped closer, his presence warm and grounding in the midst of all this mystical chaos. 3 nights ago, every oracle in 5 territories had the same vision at the exact moment you healed me. They saw silver flame consuming shadow, saw a woman standing at the center of a great awakening. They saw you, Maya. The clearing around them began to pulse with that ancient rhythm again, and Maya felt something stirring deep in her chest, not just her healing power, but something larger, something that felt like destiny trying to unfold. I don't want this, she whispered. I know, Kale said, his voice infinitely gentle, but want has nothing to do with destiny. The question isn't whether you're ready to be what the prophecy says you are. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop running from it. As if summoned by his words, the forest around them suddenly went silent. No bird songs, no rustling leaves, no whisper of wind through the branches, the kind of silence that meant predators were near. Maya's blood chilled as familiar howls echoed through the trees, the same howls that had chased her through the storm 3 nights ago. They found us, she breathed. Kale's expression hardened, and for a moment, Maya caught a glimpse of the direwolf that lived beneath his human facade, all predatory grace and lethal intent. Not us, he corrected. You. They're here for you. Through the trees, Maya could see shapes moving, wolves in human form, armed with silver weapons and faces twisted with hatred. At their head walked a figure she recognized with a jolt of terror. Alpha Silvermoon, her former pack leader, the man who'd banished her with orders to kill her if she ever used her gift again. Maya Karen, his voice boomed across the clearing. You were warned. You were told what would happen if you ever played healer again. Did you think we wouldn't sense the awakening? Did you think we wouldn't feel the ripples of power when you broke our laws? Maya's hands began to shake. Behind Alpha Silvermoon, she could see at least 20 wolves, all armed, all ready to end her life. There was nowhere to run in this sacred grove, nowhere to hide. But as terror threatened to overwhelm her, she felt Kale's hand slip into hers, felt his strength flowing into her through their connection. You're not alone this time, he murmured, so low only she could hear, and you're not that frightened girl who made a mistake. You're the silver flame. It's time to stop hiding from what you are. The altar behind them pulsed with ancient light, and Maya felt something deep in her soul beginning to unfurl like wings she'd never known she possessed. The confrontation erupted faster than Maya could process. Alpha Silvermoon stepped into the sacred clearing with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a battle, his silver-streaked hair catching the mystical light emanating from the altar. Behind him, 20 of his best warriors spread out in a perfect hunting formation, their weapons glinting with the deadly shine of blessed silver. 3 years. The Alpha's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. 3 years we've tracked the ripples of your cursed power across the territories. Every time someone reported strange healings, unexplained recoveries, we investigated, always one step behind the monster who destroyed my son. Maya felt Kale tense beside her, felt the barely contained power radiating from his skin like heat from a forge, but Alpha Silvermoon's next words froze her blood. Did you think we wouldn't feel it when you awakened another direwolf? His eyes shifted to Kale with undisguised disgust. How many more monsters will you create before we stop you permanently? She didn't create anything. Kale's voice was deadly quiet, the tone of a predator giving one last warning before striking. I was born direwolf. Old man. Your ignorance doesn't change reality. Alpha Silvermoon laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Born direwolf? Impossible. The bloodlines died out, centuries ago. No, what stands before me is another of her abominations. Another weapon she's crafted to unleash on innocent packs. The circle of warriors tightened, and Maya realized with growing horror that they weren't just here to arrest her, they were here to execute both her and Kale on the spot. You're wrong, Maya found her voice, though it shook with more than fear. You don't understand what really happened that night. Festus. Don't speak his name. Alpha Silvermoon's roar echoed through the sacred grove, and several of his warriors flinched at the raw pain in their leader's voice. You murdered my boy as surely as if you'd put a silver bullet through his heart yourself. You turned him into something that butchered innocence for sport, and now you've done it again. The altar behind them pulsed brighter, responding to the emotional chaos erupting in the clearing. Ancient symbols flared to life along the stone surface, and Maya felt the prophecy's power pressing against her consciousness, like a living thing. But Alpha Silvermoon wasn't finished. He gestured to his warriors, and they raised their weapons in perfect synchronization. By the laws of the Northern Territories, by the blood debt you owe to 16 innocent souls, I sentence you to death, Maya Karen. Your mate can die beside you for harboring a known fugitive and conspiring to spread the direwolf curse. Wait. Maya stepped forward, putting herself between Kale and the armed wolves. He's not part of this. Let him go, and I'll come with you willingly. No. Kale's hand clamped down on her wrist, with gentle but implacable strength. That's not happening. Alpha Silvermoon's smile was cold as winter frost. How noble. The monster wants to protect her latest victim. Tell me, King, do you even know what you've become? Can you feel the hunger growing? The need to hunt, to kill, to tear apart anything weaker than yourself? Maya felt Kale go absolutely still beside her, felt something dark and dangerous shifting beneath his controlled exterior. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if Alpha Silvermoon was right. If the man she was beginning to trust was just another Festus waiting to happen. I know exactly what I am, Kale said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the very air vibrate. I am the Direwolf King, heir to bloodlines that ruled when your ancestors were still learning to walk upright. I am the shadow that keeps the real monsters at bay, and I am her mate. Power exploded outward from him, like a shockwave, and Maya watched in stunned awe as Kale's human form began to shift, not into a normal wolf, but into something larger, more primal. His bones stretched and reshaped, muscles rippling with supernatural strength, until an enormous black wolf stood where the man had been moments before. But this wasn't the mindless beast that Festus had become. This was controlled power, ancient wisdom wrapped in lethal grace. Kale's wolf form radiated authority that made every other wolf in the clearing, including Alpha Silvermoon, instinctively want to bare their throats in submission. Impossible, one of the warriors breathed. The old bloodlines are extinct, another whispered. Alpha Silvermoon recovered first, raising his silver-blessed rifle with hands that only trembled slightly. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. Direwolf, king, monster, you all die the same way. The shot cracked through the sacred grove like thunder. Maya screamed, silver flame erupting from her hands without conscious thought. The bullet, aimed straight for Kale's heart, struck her barrier of healing light and disintegrated into harmless sparks. But the effort cost her. Pain lanced through her skull as the untrained use of power in such a sacred place created feedback that nearly knocked her unconscious. She staggered, and Kale's massive wolf form pressed against her side, supporting her weight. Stand down, Silvermoon. Another voice cut through the chaos, and Maya's heart sank as she recognized the speaker. Elder Festus, Alpha Silvermoon's most trusted advisor, and the wolf who'd spoken the banishment sentence 3 years ago. He stepped into the clearing, flanked by a dozen more warriors, effectively doubling the forces arrayed against them. This sacred ground has been defiled enough by her presence, Elder Festus declared, his ancient voice carrying absolute conviction. But look around you, Alpha. Look at what her power is doing to this place. Maya followed his gaze and gasped. The altar was blazing now, silver light pouring from every carved symbol. The trees around the clearing had begun to glow with inner fire, and the very ground beneath their feet hummed with awakening power. She's activating the old magics, Elder Festus continued. Magics that were sealed for good reason. If we don't stop her now, she could tear holes in reality itself. You're wrong, Maya protested. But even she could feel the unstable energy building around them. The prophecy wasn't just words carved in stone, it was a living spell, and her presence was causing it to unfold whether she wanted it to or not. Look at her mark. Elder Festus pointed at Maya's exposed shoulder, where the silver flame birthmark was now blazing like a brand. The cursed one has awakened. The destroyer prophesied in the old warnings. She will tear apart the barrier between worlds, and let chaos reign. That's not the prophecy. Kale started to shift back to human form, but Alpha Silvermoon cut him off. I don't care which prophecy is true, the Alpha snarled. My son is dead. 16 innocent wolves are dead, and she's the reason why. He raised his weapon again. This ends now. But before he could fire, the forest around them erupted into chaos. Shadow creatures poured from between the trees, things that looked like wolves made of living darkness, with eyes that burned like red coals. They moved with inhuman speed, and their howls carried the sound of nightmares made manifest. Shadow walkers, Elder Festus breathed in terror. The barriers are already weakening. The Silver Moon warriors scattered, turning their weapons on the new threat, but silver bullets passed harmlessly through the shadow creatures' forms. Only Kale seemed unaffected, his direwolf form standing firm against the supernatural invasion. In the midst of the chaos, Maya felt the prophecy's power surging through her like wildfire. She was the bridge between worlds. But what if everyone was right? What if she was destined to destroy rather than heal? Choose. A voice whispered in her mind, ancient and implacable. Save them all, or watch everything burn. Maya looked at Kale, at the terrified warriors, at the shadow creatures closing in from all sides. Then she closed her eyes, and reached for power that could either salvation or damnation. The hidden cave Kale led her to felt like stepping into another world entirely. After the chaos at the sacred grove, after Maya had somehow banished the shadow walkers with a surge of silver flame that left her unconscious for hours, they'd barely escaped before more Silver Moon reinforcements arrived. Now, deep in the mountains that bordered his territory, they'd found sanctuary in a cavern that seemed carved from living crystal. Firelight danced across walls, embedded with veins of silver and quartz, casting everything in warm, ethereal light. A natural hot spring bubbled at the far end of the cave, filling the space with gentle steam that smelled of minerals and magic. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely at odds with the turmoil raging in Maya's chest. How long have you known about this place? Maya asked, settling onto the furs Kal had spread near the fire. Her whole body still ached from channeling more power than she'd ever attempted before. Since I was a child, Kale replied, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He'd shifted back to human form hours ago, but she could still sense the wolf in him, patient, protective, watchful. When being the heir to an ancient bloodline became too much to bear, I'd come here to hide. He moved with that fluid grace she was beginning to recognize, tending the fire with practiced efficiency, but there was something different about him now. The regal authority he wore like armor had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the crown. What was it like? Maya found herself asking, growing up knowing what you were? Kale was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried decades of old pain. Lonely, he said simply. Dire wolves aren't made for packs the way normal wolves are. We're too dominant, too powerful. Other wolves either fear us or try to challenge us. There's no middle ground. He sat beside her on the furs, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, but careful not to touch. Always careful, she realized, always holding himself back. The elders spent my entire childhood teaching me control, he continued, staring into the flames. How to leash the hunger, how to suppress the killing instinct, how to rule through diplomacy instead of dominance. They were terrified I'd become like the dire wolves of legend, mindless beasts who ruled through fear and slaughter. Maya studied his profile in the firelight, seeing the tension in his jaw, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. Is that why you never took a mate? Because you were afraid of hurting someone? No. Kale turned to look at her, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her breath catch. I never took a mate, because I was waiting for you. Kale. I've known since I was 16, he said, reaching out to trace a finger along her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The night I first shifted into my full direwolf form, I had a vision. Silver flame dancing in darkness, healing hands that could touch my soul without burning. A woman with eyes like storm clouds, who would see me as more than a monster. Maya's heart stuttered. That's impossible. Visions aren't. Dire wolves are tied to the old magics in ways normal wolves aren't, Kale interrupted. We dream true sometimes. See fragments of destiny written in starlight and shadow. His thumb brushed across her lips, and she shivered at the contact. I've been searching for you for over a decade, Maya. Following whispers and rumors, investigating every healer with unusual gifts. Why didn't you find me sooner? Pain flickered across his features. Because you were hiding. After Festus, after your exile, you buried your light so deep I could barely sense it. It wasn't until you saved me in the forest, until you poured your essence directly into my body, that I could finally track you. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. Maya felt tears she didn't understand prickle at her eyes. I'm still the woman who destroyed your son, she whispered. I'm still dangerous, still cursed. You're not cursed, Kale said fiercely, his hands framing her face with infinite care. You're magnificent. Do you know what you did back there in the grove? You didn't just banish shadow walkers. You sealed a dimensional rift that could have swallowed half the territory. Power like that doesn't come from a curse. It comes from a blessing so ancient and pure that most people can't recognize it. But what if they're right? Maya's voice broke on the words. What if I am meant to destroy everything? What if saving Festus was just the beginning, and I'm destined to tear apart the barriers between worlds? Instead of answering with words, Kyle leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. The simple contact sent warmth flooding through her entire being, and for a moment the constant fear that lived in her chest quieted. Can I show you something? He asked softly. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. Kale took her hands in his, and placed them flat against his chest, right over his heart. Feel, he commanded gently. At first, Maya only felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and the warmth of his skin. But then something deeper stirred, a connection that went beyond the physical. She gasped, as she felt his wolf consciousness brush against hers, ancient and wild and utterly controlled. Through that connection, she saw flashes of his memories. A lonely child practicing shifting forms in secret, years of rigid training, learning to suppress every natural instinct. The weight of a crown passed down through generations of dire wolf kings, and underneath it all, a bone-deep loneliness that mirrored her own. But there was more. She saw how he looked at her, not with the fear or disgust she expected, but with wonder, with reverence, with a love so pure and absolute it took her breath away. You see all my darkness, Kale murmured against her hair, the beast that lives beneath my skin, the hunger I fight every day, the capacity for violence that terrifies even me, and you're not afraid. Should I be? Maya whispered. Everyone else is. His voice was raw with honesty. Even my own counsel sometimes looks at me like I'm a loaded weapon that might go off at any moment. But you, he pulled back to look into her eyes. You touched my soul the night you healed me. You know exactly what I am. And you're still here. Maya felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. I see you, Maya, he said, echoing the words from her vision of his memories. All of you. The healer, the exile, the woman who carries silver flame in her very bones. The darkness and the light, the power and the pain, and I'm not going anywhere. Before she could lose her nerve, Maya closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like neither of them quite believed this moment was real, but then Kale's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and Maya melted into the warmth of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maya rested her forehead against his. I'm scared, she admitted. What if I hurt you? What if I can't control it? Then we'll figure it out together, Kale said simply. That's what mates do. The word sent a thrill through her that she tried to suppress. Is that what we are? Mates? Kale's smile was soft and devastating. That's up to you. But Maya, his voice grew serious. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the prophecies say or the councils decide, I want you to know something. What? You're not alone anymore. Whatever comes next, we face it together. For the first time in 3 years, Maya felt like she could believe in tomorrow. Maya woke to the sound of voices, low, urgent whispers that made her blood run cold even before she understood the words. Dawn light filtered through the cave entrance, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Kale sat with his back to her near the mouth of the cave, and Maya's heart warmed at the sight of him silhouetted against the morning sky. Her mate, her anchor in a world that had spent years trying to tear her apart. Then she heard what he was saying, and her entire world shattered. Told you, the binding is almost complete. She trusts me now. Kale's voice carried clearly in the still morning air, speaking to someone Maya couldn't see. One more night, maybe 2, and she'll be completely under the mate bond's influence. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Mate bond's influence? What was he talking about? And you're certain she won't sense the manipulation? The second voice was female, cultured, with an accent Maya recognized as belonging to the Northern High Council. Direwolf bonds are different from normal mate bonds, Kale replied, and there was something clinical in his tone that Maya had never heard before. They're designed to create complete submission in the partner. Once fully established, she'll be incapable of refusing any command I give her. The silver flame power will be mine to control. The words hit Maya like physical blows. She pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out, her entire body trembling with shock and betrayal. Excellent, the woman continued. The council was beginning to worry that your emotional involvement might compromise the mission. Some of us wondered if you were actually developing feelings for the target. Kale's laugh was cold. Nothing like the warm sound Maya had fallen asleep to just hours ago. Feelings? For the creature that's destined to tear holes in reality? Please. She's a weapon, Counselor Thorn. A very dangerous weapon that needs to be properly leashed before she destroys everything we've built. Target. Weapon. Creature. Each word carved deeper into Maya's heart than the last. She'd been such a fool, such a naive, desperate fool who'd actually believed that someone could love her for who she was instead of what she could do. The reports from the Sacred Grove are concerning, Counselor Thorn said. Witnesses claim she banished an entire pack of shadow walkers with a single gesture. That level of power will serve the Northern Territories well once she's properly bound, Kale finished. Imagine having that kind of force at our disposal. We could end the rebellion in the Eastern Pax in a matter of days, secure our borders against the Southern invaders permanently. Maya's hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, where the mate mark had appeared sometime during the night, a silver flame intertwined with a black wolf, beautiful and damning all at once. She'd woken thinking it was a sign of destiny, of love finally finding her after years of loneliness. Now she realized it was a caller. What about the Silver Moon Pack's interference? Counselor Thorn asked. Alpha Silver Moon still wants her dead. Let him try. Kale's voice carried deadly confidence. Once the bond is complete, she'll be under the protection of the Direwolf Crown. Anyone who moves against her will be moving against me. But more importantly, she'll be too thoroughly controlled to pose any threat to anyone ever again. The casual cruelty in his words, the way he spoke about destroying her autonomy like it was a necessary business transaction, made bile rise in Maya's throat. And if she resists the bond? If she realizes what's happening? She won't. Kale stood, and Maya caught a glimpse of his profile through the cave entrance. The face that had looked at her with such tenderness, just hours ago now, wore an expression of cold calculation. Silver flame healers are naturally drawn to dire wolves. It's biological. They can't help but want to save us, to heal our supposed darkness. I've simply been feeding that instinct, while building the psychic connections necessary for total control. Feeding that instinct. Every gentle touch, every vulnerable confession, every moment she'd thought they were building something real, it had all been lies. Manipulation designed to trap her more thoroughly than any cage ever could. The preliminary reports from our researchers are fascinating. Counselor Thorne continued. A dire wolf with access to silver flame power could theoretically live indefinitely. Enhanced healing, enhanced strength, enhanced everything. You're not just securing a weapon, Your Majesty. You're securing your own immortality. Maya's vision blurred with tears of rage and heartbreak. Of course, it wasn't just about controlling her power, it was about stealing it, making himself into something even more monstrous than he already was. The thought had occurred to me, Kale replied with dark satisfaction, though I admit, the process of breaking her has been more challenging than expected. Silver flame healers apparently have some natural resistance to psychic manipulation. It's required a more intimate approach than I originally planned. The way he said, intimates made Maya's skin crawl. Every kiss, every gentle touch, every moment of connection had been calculated to destroy her defenses and leave her vulnerable to whatever he was doing to her mind. Well, your sacrifice for the greater good will be remembered, Counselor Thorne said with dry humor. Though I admit, some of us are curious whether you'll keep her as a consort once she's properly bound. The power boost from proximity to a silver flame could be quite addictive. Perhaps, Kale mused, though I suspect once the binding is complete, what's left of her personality won't be particularly interesting. The process tends to burn away everything that makes them. She'll be a perfectly obedient vessel for silver flame power, and nothing more. Maya bit down on her fist, hard enough to draw blood, using the pain to keep from screaming. Nothing more. That's all she'd ever been to him. All she'd ever be to anyone. Excellent. The council will be pleased with your progress. When should we expect? The voices faded as the speakers moved away from the cave entrance. But Maya had heard enough, more than enough. She lay there in the growing daylight, staring at the cave ceiling, while everything she'd started to believe about herself, about love, about the possibility of belonging somewhere crumbled around her like ancient stone. The mate mark on her shoulder burned like a brand, and she could feel something alien pressing against the edges of her mind. Kale's influence, trying to sink deeper into her thoughts. How long had he been in her head? How much of what she'd felt for him was real, and how much was manufactured by his psychic manipulation? Trust me, he'd said last night. You're not alone anymore. All lies, beautiful, perfect lies designed to destroy her from the inside out. Maya closed her eyes and reached deep into herself, past the hurt and betrayal, past the part of her that wanted to curl up and die, rather than face another rejection, down to the core of silver flame that had always been hers alone. If Kale wanted a weapon, she'd give him one. But it wouldn't be the obedient tool he was expecting. Maya Karen, exile, healer, destroyer, was done being anyone's victim. When Kale returned to the cave an hour later, his face carefully arranged in that expression of gentle concern that had fooled her so completely, Maya was waiting for him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she said sweetly. "We need to talk." Kale stepped into the cave, wearing that perfectly crafted expression of gentle concern, and Maya had to admire his acting skills. If she hadn't heard him planning her complete psychological destruction just an hour ago, she might have actually believed the worry in his golden eyes was real. "You're awake early," he said, settling beside her on the furs with practiced ease. His hand reached out to stroke her hair, and Maya let him, even as her skin crawled at the contact. How are you feeling? You pushed yourself hard yesterday. I'm fine, Maya replied, her voice steady, despite the rage building like pressure behind her ribs. Actually, I wanted to thank you. Kale's eyebrows rose slightly. Thank me? For showing me who I really am. Maya turned to face him fully, and she saw the exact moment he realized something had changed. His hands stilled against her hair, and those predator's instincts that made him such an effective manipulator suddenly went on high alert. Maya, he started, but she cut him off with a smile that was all sharp edges and silver fire. Did you know that silver flame healers have enhanced hearing when we're emotional? She stood gracefully, moving to stand near the cave entrance, where he'd had his little chat with Counselor Thorne, especially when we're heartbroken. Amazing what you can pick up when someone's discussing your complete psychological destruction, just outside your bedroom. The mask dropped from Kale's face like a stone into water. Gone was the gentle lover, the understanding mate, the wounded king who'd shared his vulnerabilities. In his place stood something cold and calculating, beautiful in the way that poisonous things were beautiful. I see, he said quietly, rising to his feet with predatory grace. And here I thought I'd have more time to complete the bonding process before you figured it out. Before I figured out that you're planning to turn me into a mindless weapon. Maya's voice was deadly calm. Before I realized that every kiss, every touch, every moment of supposed connection was just you worming your way into my mind so you could steal my autonomy. Kale tilted his head, studying her with the detached interest of a scientist, examining a particularly fascinating specimen. You're angrier than I expected. The preliminary bonding should have made you more compliant, more willing to see reason. Your mistake was thinking I'd be easy to break. Silver flame began to flicker around Maya's fingers, responding to her emotional state. You assumed that because I've been hurt before, because I've been rejected and exiled, that I'd be grateful for any scrap of affection, even fake affection designed to enslave me. It wasn't all fake, Kale said, and for just a moment, something genuine flickered in his eyes. You are remarkable. Under different circumstances, you still would have been a lying, manipulative bastard who sees people as tools to be used. The silver flame spread up Maya's arms, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. The only difference is, you might have felt slightly guilty about it. The temperature in the cave began to rise as Maya's power built. She could feel the mate mark on her shoulder burning, feel Kale's psychic influence trying to sink deeper into her mind, whispering that she was overreacting, that she should calm down, that she should trust him. She burned it all away with silver fire. You know what the really pathetic part is? Maya continued, her power growing stronger with each word. I actually started to believe that someone could see past the exile, past the danger, past the blood on my hands. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could love me for who I am instead of what I can do. Maya, you need to calm down, Kale said, and now there was genuine concern in his voice, not for her well-being, but for his own safety as silver flame began to dance across the cave ceiling. Your power is destabilizing. You could bring down the entire mountain. Good, Maya snarled, and the word rang with harmonics that made the stone walls tremble. Maybe it's time the world learned what happens when you try to cage silver flame. She raised her hand, and power poured out of her like a tsunami. But this wasn't the controlled healing energy she'd used before. This was raw, primal force that had been building inside her for 3 years of exile, rejection, and pain. The cave filled with blazing silver light, and through the brightness, Maya saw Kale shift into his direwolf form, massive, ancient, terrifying, but no match for the fury of a silver flame healer who'd finally stopped holding back. You want to know what I am? Maya's voice echoed with power that shook the mountain itself. I'm not your weapon. I'm not your tool. I'm not your sacrifice. She stepped forward, and where her feet touched the ground, silver flames sprouted from the stone itself. I am Maya Karin, heir to bloodlines that burned before your ancestors learned to walk upright. I am the silver flame, the bridge between worlds, the one who stands at the crossroads of destiny and choice. Kale's wolf form backed toward the cave entrance, but there was nowhere to run. Maya's power filled every inch of the space, turning the air itself into liquid fire. "And you?" Maya's smile was terrible and beautiful, like watching a star go supernova. "You made the mistake of thinking you could own me." She raised both hands, and silver flame erupted from her like wings made of starlight. The power lifted her off the ground, surrounding her in an aura of light so bright it hurt to look at directly. But as her power reached its crescendo, ready to reduce Kale to ash and bring down half the mountain in the process, Maya felt something else, a presence that made her silver flame flicker and dance like a candle in wind. "Not yet, daughter. Not like this." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of prophecies written in the language of creation itself. Through the blazing light, Maya saw them, figures made of silver mist and starlight, standing in the cave like they'd always been there. The first ones, the original silver flame healers, who'd walked between worlds when the barriers were young. "Your rage is justified," the voice continued, and Maya realized it came from the figure at the center of the group, a woman whose face was a mirror of her own, but aged by eons of wisdom. "But this is not your moment of choice. Greater darkness comes. He will kneel before you soon enough. But first, you must choose whether to save the world that has rejected you." The silver flame around Maya began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and through the power, she felt something vast and terrible stirring in the distance. Shadow creatures, but not the ones from the sacred grove. Something older, hungrier, with voices that sang of endings and emptiness. "The barriers weaken," her ancestral mother said. "The old seals fail. Soon the choice will come, stand as guardian, or watch everything burn." Maya looked down at Kale's wolf form, still cowering beneath her power, and felt her rage crystallize into something harder and colder than diamond. "This isn't over," she said, her voice carrying across dimensions. "When the real fight comes, when you need someone to stand between the world and the dark, you'll come crawling back, and then we'll see who really controls whom." She gathered her power around herself like a cloak made of stars, and stepped through the cave wall as if it were mist, leaving Kale alone with the ashes of his plans, and the knowledge that he'd just unleashed something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. In the distance, reality began to fray at the edges, and something hungry started scratching at the walls between worlds. 3 days after Maya walked through solid stone and disappeared into legend, the world began to unravel. It started small, shadows that moved when no one was looking, whispers in languages that predated human memory, dreams that left people screaming in the middle of the night. But by the 3rd day, even the most skeptical wolf packs couldn't deny that something fundamental had shifted in the fabric of reality. The barriers between worlds were failing. Standing on the battlements of his ancestral castle, Kale Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, heir to the direwolf bloodline, master manipulator, and fool, watched smoke rise from a dozen burning settlements, and knew with absolute certainty that he had made the greatest mistake of his immortal life. "Your Majesty," Counselor Thorn approached with the careful steps of someone delivering very bad news to a very dangerous predator. "The reports from the eastern borders." "How many?" Kale's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd felt nothing since Maya left. Not rage, not regret, nothing but a vast emptiness where something vital used to live. 17 settlements completely overrun. The Shadow Walkers are stronger now, more organized. They're not just hunting randomly, they're systematically destroying anything with silver flame blood. It's like they're looking for something. Or someone. They're looking for her, Kale thought, but didn't say. The shadow creatures weren't just mindless destroyers. They were soldiers in a war that had been brewing since the barriers first cracked. And Maya, with her pure silver flame bloodline, was both their greatest threat and their primary target. What about the other packs? Are they mobilizing? Counselor Thorn's silence was answer enough. The Northern Territories were fracturing along old grudges and newer fears. Half the packs blamed Maya for the supernatural invasion. the cursed healer whose power had finally torn reality apart. The other half were too busy running to assign blame to anyone. The Silver Moon Pack has issued a formal challenge, the counselor finally said. Alpha Silver Moon claims you're harboring a fugitive who's brought about the end times. He's demanding Maya's immediate execution, and your abdication if you refuse to hand her over. Kale almost smiled at that. Hand her over, as if he had any idea where Maya had gone, or any power to compel her to do anything ever again. And if I could find her? Kale asked, more to himself than to his advisor. What then? Force her to clean up a mess she didn't create? Beg her to save a world that spent 3 years trying to kill her? Your Majesty? But Kale wasn't really talking to Counselor Thorn anymore. He was remembering Silver Flame dancing across cave walls, remembering the look in Maya's eyes when she'd realized the depth of his betrayal, remembering the way she'd spoken her name like a battle cry. I am Maya Karen. He'd tried to reduce her to a tool, a weapon to be controlled and used. Instead, he'd awakened something magnificent and terrible, something that could save them all, or watch them burn with equal indifference. And which would she choose? A new sound reached them from the courtyard below, the thunder of hooves and the shouts of riders arriving at full gallop. Kale looked down to see a scout from the Southern Territories, dismounting from a horse that was foaming at the mouth from exhaustion. Your Majesty, the scout called up. Emergency dispatch from the Ironwood Pack. Minutes later, the scout stood before Kale's throne, dust-covered and shaking with exhaustion or fear or both. The Ironwood territory has fallen, Your Majesty. The entire pack, 200 wolves, wiped out in a single night. But that's not, the scout swallowed hard. That's not the strange part. Continue. Before they died, before the Shadow Walkers overran their defenses, the Ironwood oracles had a vision. All of them. At the same time, they sent this message with their dying breath. The scout pulled out a piece of parchment that seemed to shimmer with residual magic. When Kale took it, words appeared on the surface, as if written in liquid starlight. The Silver Flame walks between worlds now, seeking the heart of Shadow. She who was rejected stands at the crossroads of salvation and vengeance. The choice approaches. Will she be guardian or executioner? Will love triumph over betrayal? The fate of all things rests on a question that has no answer. Does she choose the world that cast her out, or does she let it burn for its sins? Time grows short. The first darkness stirs. She cannot face it alone, but will anyone stand beside her when the final hour comes? The words faded, as soon as Kale finished reading them, leaving nothing but blank parchment, and the weight of prophecy. Kale closed his eyes and saw Maya as she'd been that last night, beautiful and powerful and utterly his, or so he'd thought. Now he understood that she'd never been anyone's to claim. She was Silver Flame incarnate, the bridge between worlds, the one who would decide whether reality survived the coming storm. And he'd tried to enslave her. What kind of man does that make me? He wondered. What kind of king tries to cage the very thing his kingdom needs to survive? But even as guilt and regret threatened to drown him, another part of Kale's mind was working, calculating, planning, because somewhere out there, Maya was facing an enemy that had destroyed entire realities in ages past. She was walking into a battle that could end everything, and she was doing it alone because the people who should have stood beside her had spent years trying to destroy her instead. Would you have chosen her? The oracle's message had asked. Or would you have feared her too? The honest answer burned in Kale's chest like acid. He had feared her, not her power, but what loving her would cost him. He'd been so afraid of losing control, so terrified of being vulnerable, that he'd convinced himself manipulation was safer than trust. Now control was an illusion, and safety was a joke, because reality itself was coming apart at the seams. Your Majesty? Counselor Thorn's voice seemed to come from very far away. What are your orders? Kale looked out at his crumbling kingdom, at the smoke rising from burning towns, at a world that was about to learn the true cost of rejecting its only hope for survival. Mobilize every pack that will answer our call, he said quietly. Every warrior, every alpha, every wolf with fight left in them. To do what, sir? Kale stood, and for the first time in days, something resembling purpose flickered in his golden eyes. To find Maya Karen, to kneel before her and beg her forgiveness, to stand beside her when the real enemy shows itself. His voice grew stronger with each word, and to pray that she's more merciful than we deserve. In the distance, thunder rolled across a clear sky, and somewhere between the worlds, silver flame burned against an encroaching darkness that whispered promises of endings. So here's the question that matters. A voice seemed to whisper in the wind, carrying the weight of prophecies and the echo of choices yet unmade. When everything you've ever known stands on the edge of destruction, when the woman who could save it all has every reason to let it burn, whose side would you choose? Would you stand with the exiled healer who carries silver flame in her heart? Would you kneel before the woman your people tried to destroy? Would you trust your fate to someone who has no reason to trust you? Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. Not prophecies or power, not kings or kingdoms, but the simple, terrifying question of whether love can triumph over betrayal, whether redemption is possible when the cost is so high. Maya Karen walks between worlds now, carrying the weight of everyone's survival on shoulders that have borne too much already. And somewhere in the growing darkness, something ancient and hungry is waiting to see if the girl with silver flame in her blood will choose to be their salvation or their executioner. If this story has lit something inside you, if you're burning to know what happens when the most powerful Alpha King comes crawling back to the woman he betrayed, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, because here in this space where stories live and breathe and burn, we're just getting started. And trust me when I say this, you don't want to miss what comes next. In the space between heartbeats, between one world and the next, Maya Karen stood at the edge of everything. The realm she'd walked into when she passed through Solid Stone wasn't quite the spirit world, wasn't quite reality. It was the thin place where all possibilities converged, where the barriers between what was and what could be grew gossamer thin. Here silver flame didn't just heal, it revealed truth in all its terrible, beautiful glory. And the truth she saw made her blood run cold. The Shadow Walkers weren't the real threat. They were just the advanced scouts, the harbingers of something so ancient and hungry that even the first ones spoke of it in whispers. Through the swirling mists of the between space, Maya could see it stirring in the deepest darkness, a presence that had been waiting since the dawn of time for the barriers to weaken enough for it to break free. The Devourer of Lights, her ancestral memories whispered, the thing that came before creation, that sought to drag everything back into the void where it was born. Maya watched through dimensional windows as Kale mobilized his forces, as Alpha Silvermoon gathered his hunters, as packs across the territories prepared for a war they didn't understand against an enemy they couldn't comprehend, all of them looking for her, some to worship, some to destroy, none of them realizing that she was already exactly where she needed to be. Standing guard at the heart of everything, holding the line between existence and oblivion. How long? She asked the silver flame that danced around her fingers, that had become as much a part of her as breathing. Days, came the answer from voices that sounded like her own but aged by eons. Perhaps hours. The seals weaken with every shadow walker that crosses over. When enough of them have fed on this reality's life force, the way will be open. Maya closed her eyes and felt the weight of every choice that had led her to this moment. Festus's death, her exile, 3 years of running and hiding, Kale's betrayal, all of it had been preparation for this, the moment when she would have to decide whether the world that had rejected her was worth saving. I could let it burn, she thought, and the idea held a terrible appeal. I could step aside and watch everything that hurt me crumble to ash, let them reap what they've sown. But even as the thought formed, she felt the silver flame inside her recoil, because she wasn't just Maya Karen anymore. She was the bridge between worlds, the guardian who stood at the crossroads of destiny, and guardians didn't get to choose based on personal grudges. They chose based on what was right. A ripple of disturbance echoed through the between space, and Maya turned to see a figure approaching through the swirling mists. Not one of the first ones this time, but someone achingly familiar, despite the ethereal glow that surrounded him. "Festus," she breathed. He looked exactly as he had the day she'd healed him, before the silver flame had awakened the dire wolf bloodline that drove him mad. Golden hair, warm brown eyes, the easy smile that had made her fall in love with him, when they were both too young to understand the consequences. "Hello, Maya," he said, his voice carrying the peaceful cadence of someone who'd found rest, after years of torment. "I've been waiting for you." "You're dead." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "I watched them put a silver bullet through your heart." "I am dead," Festus agreed, settling beside her on what might have been a cliff, overlooking the swirling chaos of unborn possibilities. "But death isn't the end for those touched by silver flame. I've been here, in the between space, learning what I was too mad to understand, when I was alive." Maya stared at him. This ghost of her first love, this reminder of her greatest failure. "Why are you here now?" "To tell you something I should have said before the direwolf madness took me." Festus reached out as if to touch her face, but his fingers passed through her like mist. "You didn't destroy me, Maya. You saved me. The monster I became, that wasn't your fault. It was mine for not understanding what your gift was trying to show me. You killed 16 innocent wolves." "The direwolf killed 16 innocent wolves," Festus corrected gently. "I was already gone by then, lost in bloodlust and ancient instincts I had no training to control. But you tried to heal me, tried to make me whole. That's not destruction, Maya. That's love." Tears Maya hadn't realized she was crying began to fall, each drop turning to liquid silver before it hit the ground of the between space. "I've spent 3 years believing I was cursed," she whispered. "You spent 3 years learning to control a power that could reshape reality itself," Festus replied. "Every moment of exile, every rejection, every lonely night, it was all preparing you for this, for the choice you have to make right now." Through the dimensional windows, Maya could see the shadow walkers massing at the borders of reality, could feel the ancient hunger stirring in the deep dark. Soon, very soon, the final seal would break, and the devourer would be free to consume everything that had ever been, or ever could be. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Maya admitted. Festus smiled, and for a moment he looked solid enough to touch. "You've been strong enough since the day you were born with silver flame in your blood. The question isn't whether you can stop what's coming, it's whether you're willing to forgive the world that hurt you enough to try." Before Maya could respond, another presence made itself known in the between space. This one radiated power and remorse in equal measure, and Maya's heart clenched as she recognized the psychic signature she'd learned too well. Kale materialized out of the swirling mists, but not as she'd ever seen him before. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like humility. When he saw her, he immediately dropped to one knee. "Maya," he said, and his voice carried the weight of kingdoms crumbling. "You've come to beg," Maya finished, her voice colder than the space between stars. "You've come crawling back, because the world is ending, and you need the weapon you tried so hard to forge." "No." Kale looked up at her, and Maya was shocked to see tears in those golden eyes. "I've come to tell you that I'm sorry, that I was wrong, that if the world ends because of my arrogance and stupidity, I'll deserve every moment of whatever hell comes after." Maya stared at him, this king who'd tried to steal her soul, who'd planned to turn her into nothing more than an obedient vessel for power. He looked broken, hollow, like a man who'd lost everything that mattered and finally understood what he'd thrown away. "Pretty words," Maya said, "but words are all you've ever given me. Lies wrapped in silver tongue and false promises." "I know," Kale's voice cracked. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But Maya, I'm not here for me. I'm here for them." He gestured toward the dimensional windows, showing the mortal realm. "For every innocent person who's about to die, because I was too much of a coward to love you the way you deserved." In the distance, reality shuddered as another seal cracked. The shadow walker's howls grew louder, more triumphant, and Maya felt the devourer's attention turn toward the weakening barriers like a shark scenting blood in the water. Festus stood, his ghostly form beginning to fade. The choice is yours, Maya. It was always yours. But, remember, you're not just choosing for yourself. You're choosing for everyone who comes after. He disappeared into the swirling mists, leaving Maya alone with the man who'd broken her heart, and the weight of a decision that would echo through eternity. Cale remained kneeling, his head bowed, waiting for judgment from the woman he'd tried to enslave. And in the deepest darkness, something vast and hungry began to laugh. The final seal cracked. Reality held its breath. And Maya Karen, the silver flame, the bridge between worlds, prepared to make a choice that would determine whether existence itself survived the coming storm. But that's a story for another day. Because some tales are too big, too powerful, too earth-shattering to contain in a single telling. Some stories demand sequels, demand to be continued, demand to burn their way into your soul, and refuse to let go. The Devourer of Lights stirs in its prison of dying reality. Cale Blackthorn kneels before the woman he betrayed, waiting for absolution or annihilation. And Maya Karen stands at the crossroads of everything, silver flame dancing around her fingers, about to discover that saving the world is only the beginning. The true alpha hasn't risen yet. The real battle is still to come. In the woman who was once nobody, who was once broken, who was once lost. She's about to become legend. This isn't over. This is just the beginning.